read 95 books this year, and when you read that many books, they cannot all be winners. We're going to be talking about 6 of the books that let me down this year. Just because a book is on this list, that does not mean that I think it is a bad book or poorly written. If I do, I'll say it when I'm talking about the book. There was only one book that I really truly hated in the year of 2022, so most of these books are just going to be books that I had kind of high expectations for, and then they just didn't meet those expectations. If your favorite book or a book that you love is on this list, I'm sorry, it just was not the book for me. I can already see some of y'all getting very, very mad about my number 1 most disappointing / worst book. I did actually think parts of this book were bad. We'll get there in a minute. Alright, we're obviously not going to start off with my number 1 most hated book from the year of 22. We're going to start off a little bit milder. I don't have physical copies of most of these, so most of them are going to be over here, but I do have a physical copy of Wool by Hugh Howey. This is one of the books that I put on my "These books will self-destruct in 6 months" video that I kind of abandoned and forgot, and I'm not even sure where most of the books for that are anymore. I may have unhauled some of them at this point. Who knows? I say that like I ever unhaul books. We're in this dystopian setting where people are living in this silo because the outside world is toxic. You cannot live out there. It's just not possible. Whenever someone says they want to leave the silo, they actually end up doing this thing called cleaning. They send you outside and you're supposed to go and clean the cameras that show people what the outside world looks like. I actually don't think that this is a bad book. I think it has some major flaws, and if I were not reading it for a specific video, I probably would have given up like after the first part, because it takes us quite a while to meet who is going to be the main character. I feel like Hugh Howey could have definitely integrated that better into the main story and worked through that better. The first 14 chapters are about characters that are not our main character. We don't even meet them until like over 100 pages in. I know he published this on Wattpad, and the way that you publish fic there is a little bit different than how you're going to sit down and write a book, but I do think that there was some restructuring that needed to happen before this book hit publication. I know it was popular, I know people loved it, but like coming in as someone who this is my first time reading it, the beginning was not well executed. The rest of the book I found really fascinating. I thought he did a really good job of turning things on their head, like a lot of the audience expectation or the reader expectation. I just don't think that he structured it very well, and I was kind of disappointed that like for something that was as good in the latter half as it was not. He didn't go back to make sure the first part was as good. So the next book that we are going to be talking about is Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. This is one that people either aren't that thrilled about it or people really, really love. And so I think if you're you like vibes and dark academia, I definitely think you should still pick this up, especially if you're tired of dark academia that centers whiteness. This one, the author specifically went in to be like, you know what, I understand that the university and academia in general is primarily white, but I am going to write a book that is very diverse. She was like, it's my book, I'm gonna do what I want. And I really did appreciate and like that part of the book. In Catherine House, we are following a main character who gets pulled into this very, very prestigious university or college setting. Everyone who comes out of this college ends up being like really major players at different levels depending on what they went into school for. They end up being politicians, they end up being artists, they end up being presidents, that kind of thing. They always end up being really influential people. However, as we go further into this book, our main character starts to realize that there's a lot of stuff that's not lining up, that's a little weird, and she starts to get drawn into this kind of secret society that is happening in amongst Catherine House. I really like the way that the author wrote this book, which is why the ending was so disappointing. Everything the book was trying to do, trying to say, it felt like it undid everything. Any like shred of agency our main character had just was kind of canceled out by the ending. Not to mention, I'm someone who likes to try and figure out the ending and what's going on and put together pieces and clues. I'm always looking for those. And in this book, there were a lot of clues, like just weird things that would happen, things that were out of sorts, things that you sit there as a reader and you go, oh, okay, this must mean something. And then probably 80% of those don't pan out and don't mean anything, and that kind of frustrated me. At the end of the day, while I did appreciate like the very spooky academic culty vibes, and I'm always here for a good book about cults, I just didn't feel like it lived up to the promise that it gave the reader in the beginning. It just felt like a lot of the weirdness and mystery and like different aspects of that cultishness kind of got left on the wayside as we went through the book and forgotten. If it had felt intentional that the author was doing this, maybe I would have felt differently about this book, but it didn't feel intentional. It just felt like the author was throwing stuff in there and then didn't follow through with it. The next book that we are going to be talking about is Cry of Metal and Bone by L. Penelope. This is the third book in the Earthsinger Chronicles. I really, really recommend the first two. If you don't like the first two, I'm not sure I recommend, well, obviously if you don't like the first two, I'm not going to recommend this, but like, just go into this with lower expectations than you get from the first two. It is set in this world where there are two countries that are separated by this magical veil. There is a lot of animosity between the two of them, and the first book we follow a young woman who her father came over the last time the veil fell and defected from the opposing army and ended up meeting her mother, marrying her mother. The first book is more focused on the romance and the fantasy, but I think she does come in with the second book and start really bringing in the world building for that. If you don't like the first book because you think there's not enough explanation, etc., go ahead and give the first book a try. The third book I enjoyed. I had fun with it, but it did not quite live up to the first two books. I think the way that the author kind of is working this series, we just had too much going on in this book for it to be done as well as books 1 and 2. The first book, we're mostly dealing with the one couple, and while we do see them in the second book, I felt like their parts were better balanced between the main couple for that book and then kind of checking in with the couple from the first book. Like, the way that those plots were handled was better balanced. I felt like in this book, the plot just was not balanced well. I felt like I didn't get enough time with the couple in this book to really root for them or care about them the way that I did in the first or second book, because so much of the plot is wrapping up things that happened in the second book, like going or continuing plots that happened in the second book. And so we are spending a good half of the book on not the main couple for this book, and it doesn't work as well. So this is a case of the book not necessarily being bad, because I still think it was, for the most part, well written. It just, I had it seriously hyped up. I was expecting to really, really love this and root for this couple, and it didn't, because we didn't get enough time with them. The next book that we need to talk about is Wildwood by Colin Malloy, with illustrations by his wife, Carson Ellis. This is about Prue, and when she is out one day, her baby brother gets kidnapped by a whole flock of crows. As she follows him, he ends up getting taken to this place that her parents have told her never, never to go. It's this kind of wild space called the Impassable Wilderness. Like, all the kids know about it, but nobody is willing to go inside because they know that, like, if you go in, if you come out, you're gonna be crazy. This wasn't something that I was hyped for when I picked it up, but like the first few chapters really grabbed me, and I really liked Prue as a main character. And then I got really disappointed by some of the way that these authors ended up appropriating Native American history and in some cases culture, because, like, hold on, let me see if I can find the picture that like really solidified my dislike of this book. Do we see this? She is described as wearing a buckskin dress and having feathers in her hair. It's one of those things that if this had been done by someone who had a little more understanding of what they were working with and what they were doing, I would have really appreciated it. For the most part, the story and what we're doing, it's an interesting story. It's something that I would probably recommend to kids that are in this age range, except we run into the problem where we are talking in this book about Native American history, or we are using Native American history as a plot device, and there is not a single Native character in this book. That just didn't sit right with me, especially because we're talking about Portland, Oregon. We are talking about a place where these things that they are discussing and these conflicts that are happening in this book very much did happen, and in some cases are still happening in this country. I just feel like they didn't approach this very well. I think that if they had set this somewhere else and wanted to have this conversation, they could have, because there are historical instances in Europe where we had, like, conflicts similar to what is happening in here. They're just, like, primarily among Germanic tribes, the French, and like, there are so many, like, it's so funny that we are always trying to do, like, these kind of white savior narratives for the US and, like, the Wild West. It just, if you know the history of Britain, there are places where you could go and you could take from that instead of using Native history to inspire your books. The next book we have is Electra by Jennifer Saint. This is a retelling of the Iliad and the Oresteia. One is obviously the Greek epic by Homer. The other is a trilogy following Agamemnon and his family after the Trojan War, after he comes back from murdering his daughter so that his ships can sail. We follow Clytemnestra, who is his wife, his daughter Electra, and we follow Cassandra. I was really excited because I love Greek mythology. I love looking at it from new lenses and new angles, and I loved the idea of the Oresteia, but with a focus on the female points of view, you know, with a focus on taking the narrative and reclaiming it. Unfortunately, I don't feel that this book did that at all. I just felt like this was a rehashing of the exact same events of the Oresteia without any kind of commentary or put in there. Like, it didn't feel like anything new or interesting being told about this story. It just felt like the same story from a female point of view. For me, it just didn't do anything interesting with the story. It didn't do anything interesting with the characters. It was alright for the first little bit because we're getting some of the backstory for Clytemnestra and all that, but then it got so very repetitive because you had Clytemnestra being really mad about Agamemnon killing their daughter, and you had Electra being really mad at her mother for hating her father for a perfectly good reason to hate her father, and it just was that on repeat over and over again. And then we also had Cassandra, who was just, again, repeat over and over again, trying to get people to listen to her because the Greeks are coming and no one is listening, because that's the entirety of Cassandra's point in the original story, is just to be there as a tragic character. I wanted something more, especially from Electra's plotline. And then the final one, I'm not going to talk about for too long, because every time I talk about this book and tell people that I don't like this book, I lose subscribers because apparently y'all can't handle me not liking your fave. Number one on this list is going to be Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. This is both the most disappointing book that I have read this year, especially because I really liked the second book, but also not as well written as I think people think it is. I think people see how long this book is and how much character work Robin Hobb does and go, this is a good story, and in my opinion, it is not. There was like a third of the story that I thought was satisfying and handled well, and like I could see like it being wrapped up in a way that resolved what was going on in this book, but also left room for when she goes on in the Elderlings saga, I guess, into further series in that saga. I have a whole 15-minute rant about this. If you want to see that, I will put it up here with the timestamp. Without going into it in great detail, my two main problems with this were, number one, the promise of the premise that is the hook for book one. She absolutely abandons in this book, and she doesn't, it's not even that she, throughout the course of the series, realized the character's journey needed to be different, and then she's working on getting you as the audience to a place where that makes sense. That character doesn't even get, in my opinion, a satisfying ending based on everything that has been her story, because her story is so much about her own independence. And then we just end with what happens in the ending. I'm not going to, again, get into spoilers because I can't really explain it without the spoilers. Also, this book has just a random sexual assault thrown in there for no reason, because it does absolutely nothing for the plot. It does absolutely nothing for the character relationships. The one character you would think that was on this character's side absolutely abandons her. The other character that ends up on this character's side has to be told by a woman that this happened and this person is telling the truth. And then the worst part is we end up glorifying the rapist. He gets a fantastic, heroic, happy ending type thing, or legend type thing that's going on. And she gets to be first mate on someone else's ship. I don't care if it gets fixed in further series. I don't care. I do not fucking care. Those aren't her series. If you're gonna fix it, you need to fix it in the series that she is in. I'm sorry, and in my opinion, that is not good writing. It's just like, after the fact, deciding, oh yeah, I guess I didn't really do a good job with the ending of this character's story, so I guess I'll just have to fix it in further books. That's not, fix it in the book that's about that character. Sorry, I'm getting heated again. So, anyways, that was the most disappointing book I have ever, when I say the most, I mean in my life. I have never been so... Allegiant exists, never mind, but it's the most disappointing book I have read since Allegiant. And I do not care if you think it is the best written thing since people were drawing on cave walls. I don't care if you think I misunderstood it, or if I need to read the rest of the series, which I do plan on doing because I'm enjoying the Farseer trilogy. But I don't care if you think I'm wrong, because sitting down at it and looking at it from a writer's perspective and audience expectation and all of that, it just... not well done. Here's my main gripe, because she does stuff in this book. She does stuff she does stuff in all of her books that if it was a male writer who had done this stuff, you all would not be praising his character building. You wouldn't be talking about how emotional the book made you and how it made you feel something, and so therefore that's why it's a good book. Y'all would be dragging him through the fucking coals. You would not, you'd just be, like, you wouldn't care about any of that. And yet here we have a woman who is writing this epic fantasy series, but it's lacking the nuance that you would think a woman would bring to it, and y'all think because it's written by a woman, it's fantastic. And I just, like, I've seen people drag male authors for doing some of this stuff when they haven't even done some of this stuff. And it just, like, it drives me nuts. And the frustrating thing is, she manages to take one of the other main stories that starts out in a completely different place with the character wanting completely different things, and she put in the work through these 3 books to take that character from where they are in the first book to where we find them in the final book and make that satisfying. She does that. But she had zero interest in doing it, apparently, for her female characters, just for this one little boy. So I am so mad about that. I am livid about that we did that. Those are all of the books that let me down in 2022. It's not a long list, but I'm also very good about picking out books that I think I'm gonna like. Doesn't always work out, as the last book will tell you, but I typically stick to things that I know I'm gonna like, and we'll see if that stays the same for 2023 considering some of my reading plans, but typically I do stick to things that I enjoy and know I will like, or have a high expectation that I like, and it's not really that hard to please me. Usually. I would love to know what your least favorite book was in 2022. Currently almost at the end of the 12 Days of Margaret. 12 days in air quotes, because it's probably not going to be over 12 days just because of stuff that has come up. But if you're interested in some of the other end of the year content that is a part of that, I will have whatever the most recent video is right here. Also, stay tuned. My best books of 2022 will be coming out soon. It will be coming out either tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, something like that. Hit the subscribe button if you are interested to see what books I absolutely adored this year. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, although I'm sure there will be some thumbs down just because I had harsh words for Miss Robin Hobb. That is it for now, my friends. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye!